discover the truth of who Yankee Jim was and where did he migrate from? Why did the end of his trail end in San Diego at the end of a rope? To find the answers to our questions, we would cross the Yankee Jims Bridge, take the old gravel wagon road to the ghost town of Yankee Jims. Established early in the 1849 gold rush, the mining town of Yankee Jims grew to 5,000 residents, one of the largest mining communities in Placer County. Well, one of the first questions I had to ask, is it Yankee Jim or Yankee Jims? Most local businesses knew the correct grammar. There was only one Yankee Jim. Stovall, Cravens and Company disagreed, and along with the United States Post Office, there would be no apostrophe. Yankee Jims it would be. Arriving in Yankee Jims is anticlimactic. Today, only a few buildings are left. Abandoned in 1940, the old post office stands and now has been repurposed as solely a residence. The bench in front of the post office still awaits passengers for the next stagecoach. Behind the post office, the bell from Yankee Jim's school has been saved. Today, there are no children to heed its peal. In what was once the center of downtown Yankee Jims, there is a monument offering hints of who was Yankee Jim. Yankee Jims. Gold was discovered here in 1850 by Yankee Jim, a reputed lawless character, and by 1857, town was one of the most important in Placer County. The first mining ditch in this county, constructed here by H. Starr and Eugene Phelps. Colonel William McClure introduced hydraulic mining this area in June of 1853. Anthony Chabot, a French-Canadian, had perfected the technology of hydraulic mining and introduced the technique to the gold fields north of Nevada City. Hydraulic mining would soon encircle the town of Yankee Jims. The scars left by hydraulic mining can still be seen today. As the story of Yankee Jim unfolds, it is ironic that the gold was to be found under the site of Yankee Jim's cabin, as well as his horse corral. But we are getting ahead of our tale. Who was Yankee Jim? To gather more information, we head south to Yankee Jim's sister town, Forest Hill. The current location of Forest Hill grew from a small trading post established in 1850. A fierce winter storm in 1852 caused a slide at a nearby Jenny Lind Canyon. When the miners investigated the slide debris, they discovered rich deposits of gold. A great place to gather more information on Yankee Jim will be at the Placer County's Forest Hill Museum. Troy Semester is director of Placer County's Forest Hill Divide Museum. And our question, because we're chasing a ghost, and the ghost is Yankee Jim.
Right.
And that brought us up here because part of our tour today will be to the Yankee Jim Cemetery and to see a little bit of the area to see why Yankee Jim was hanging out here. And the reason he was hanging out here was?
He was hanging out here originally anyways, he was looking for gold. And apparently, from someplace, he was getting a pretty good amount of gold.
Okay, and that was on the American River, the North Fork?
It would be near Shirt Tail Canyon in that area, which would be off of the North Fork, yes.
Okay. And he brought the gold down, and as I understand it, people were asking a question about where did you get the gold?
Right.
And then people followed him up the hill and found him and told that that's what he did. But he had a second occupation.
Well, when he got too many people in the area, he got uncomfortable with that. And he turned to horse collecting or thievery.
Okay.
And apparently that, as far as I know, he didn't do that before. I didn't hear any evidence of him doing that prior to his mining, but I don't know.
Right.
There's all kinds of stories of how he came here by coming off a ship and stuff like that on the coast, but it's a little murky. But I only started hearing about his new career after he decided he was done mining.
Okay, so he was done mining, and as the story goes, the locals, well, first let me talk about the corral. Where was the story that the horse corral?
Yeah.
Okay, where was that located?
Don't know exactly. The legend is it was in 2 or 3 different places. It was more over here towards Forest Hill, as far as I can tell, than at Yankee Jim's. He was working both areas.
Okay, so he was borrowing horses
Yes.
and placing them in the corral, and then one day in 1852, people started saying, "That's my Pinto." And what happened next?
Well, there's all kinds of different stories about what happened. Of course, they, started looking for him, chasing him down and stuff. And where he ended up, stories exist and are in books, like by Norma Cloud and stuff like that, and Bill Wilson from the Auburn Journal, that he was actually hung up here someplace.
That's true. There are 2 Yankee Jims,
Okay.
which confuses our story, because one Yankee Jim was on the Yuba River, and that was a disagreeable person, and we will talk a little bit about him, I guess, a little later, about he was hung quite quickly after he was found robbing people, and so that's one Yankee Jim. But then there was a second Yankee Jim called James Robinson.
Right.
That's where we get Jim. So this is the second one. So he was then quickly ushered out of town, I understand. What do you know about Yankee Jim?
I was always curious, I don't know the answer to this, but why the community ended up being named after him, if he was such a disreputable character,
Yeah.
It's curious.
I don't know, but I think at the beginning was that he had discovered gold,
Yeah.
and therefore, being the first person, they named it Yankee Jims.
Yeah.
And why Yankee is part of what we're going to have to look into.
And I'm assuming this is the same guy that was discovered wearing just a shirt.
Yes, that's another story.
That is this Yankee Jims you're talking about, Robinson, right?
Robinson, yes. He was found up the hill here, not too far from someone who was shot in the head,
Right.
decomposing just below. And
Exactly.
this Yankee Jim was in need of more bullets.
Yes.
And asked a gentleman to go back down the hill, and he would trade information for more bullets. And I guess we'll have to look into that part of the story.
And I thought that was curious why the guy would agree to do that, because arming this fella, she was a little concerned about already.
Yeah.
And there was the evidence of the body and stuff there. I thought that was interesting that he would commit to do that.
Well, I guess the love of gold.
I guess.
I thank you.
You bet.
And I guess we'll continue on our journey, and I guess we're going to go see some hydraulic mining sites, and then we're going to go out to the cemetery. Maybe we can get some feeling from some of the people there that might, since this is going to be a ghost story. We headed back to Yankee Jim's in order to visit Yankee Jim's historic cemetery. As the cemetery's entrance path is on private property, we had to ask permission for our visit. At the Forest Hill Museum, my discussion with Troy Semester brought up an important point. There were 2 Yankee Jims. This has led to confusion both in the 1850s and even today. James Knowlton was a horse thief and highway robber along the Yuba River, which was north of the North Fork and the town of Yankee Jims. Both Yankee Jims would have their lives ended at the end of a rope. In March 1851, Knowlton's life would end along the Yuba River watershed he had terrorized, while in San Diego on September 18, 1852, James Robinson's life would end far from his alleged horse-thieving days along the North Fork of the American River. Local newspapers, as well as those across the United States, followed the story of Knowlton's purported criminal activities. Lynching again. There has been a notorious rascal ranging around among the diggings and ranchos well known as Yankee Jim. He has been in the habit of making arrangements with a large number of men in various places who run off mules and cattle, which he takes receiving a bill of sale and sells, dividing the profits. Our advices from Concord Bar and the Middle Yuba reached us yesterday. By then we learned that Yankee Jim was caught about a week and a half ago on Rattlesnake Bar, Middle Yuba. He was charged with threatening to kill a man and with stealing horses. He was carried to Bridgeport, Nye's Crossing, South Fork of the Yuba, tried by a lynch court, and promptly executed. James Knowlton's sensational lynching was carried in newspapers both locally and around the nation. June 10th, 1848. Just 5.5 months after the discovery of gold at Sutter's lumber mill, the Sacramento Star newspaper reported, "Every seaport as far south as San Diego and every interior town and every ranch from the base of the mountains to which the gold has been found has suddenly drained of human beings. A great many good people of Oregon have also heard the call of gold." Ownership of Oregon was a hot topic during the presidencies of both Tyler and Polk. To avoid a military conflict, President Tyler agreed to a political arrangement with Britain. Oregon would be under the joint occupation of both countries. The lure of inexpensive rich land awaited anyone who could reach Oregon caught the attention of John English Ross. The year was 1847. At age 29, he was chosen to captain a 40-wagon train from Illinois to Oregon. He arrived penniless. By 1848, he had settled on a farm located near Jacksonville, Oregon. In the summer of 1848, word of the rich California gold strike reached his southern Oregon farm. In the hopes of gaining quick wealth, he abandoned his threshing machine, gathered 37 men, and headed south to the California goldfields. One member of his team was James Robinson, later to be known as Yankee Jim. His journey would take him to the North Fork of the American River. In Colonel Ross's memoir, he added a few observations of James Robinson, or the man we call Yankee Jim. The year was 1849. Yankee Jim was a notorious character. Yankee Jim was a sailor, a rough man, a very bad man. He was hung afterwards. He was a man of marked ability. He knew Spanish and several other languages perfectly. 1878. In researching the history of Placer County, historian Hubert Bancroft retold John Ross's tale of James Robinson. Using the directory of Placer County, 1861, Bancroft added, "Yankee Jim was a Sydneyite named Robinson. He built a corral for stolen horses here and was hanged in 1852. Australia served as Great Britain's penal colony. Hearing of the California gold rush, Australian merchants seized on the news, rushing saleable merchandise to San Francisco. Many of the ships, as well as paying passengers, were some of Great Britain's most despicable individuals. Once the ships reached San Francisco, passengers hurriedly left the vessel and headed up into the mother lode. Many of the sailors jumped ship. Once ashore, some put their old larcenous trades back into practice. To counter the rise in crime, vigilance committees were established, handing out quick justice. As the Aussies spread out into the mother lode, they were called Sydneyites or Sydney Ducks. To be called a Sydney Duck or Sydneyite was sure to lead to a terrible outcome. Better to be called a Yankee. Prior to 1848, in what would become Placer County, there was no history of gold mining. In May of 1848, gold was found along Auburn Ravine. By the summer of 1848, the principal tributaries of the American River were explored by a company of Oregonians. The following winter of 1849, it was reported that Yankee Jim and his companions, 6 in number, began searching for gold in the area we now call Forest Hill. The population of the area had grown to about 50. Ben Currier was born in Massachusetts on October 29, 1822. He had traveled overland to California, and at age 27, in the fall of 1849, he found himself prospecting for gold on the North Fork. Like other miners, he had heard tales of a tall prospector having found the mother lode of gold. Ben never married. In neighboring Georgetown on April 7, 1902, Ben Currier passed away. Nowhere to be found was a story where Ben contradicted the following story. Late in the summer of that fateful year 1849, rumors came to Barnes Bar of rich diggings having been found in the hills somewhere up the ridge between the North and Middle Fork, and these rumors were sometimes accompanied by a tangible evidence of their existence in the shape of large oblong pieces of gold, often weighing several ounces, brought into the camps by a character known as Yankee Jim. With laudable purpose in mind, sometime during the month of November 1849, Messrs. Currier, Smith, Steen, O'Hara, Spinks, and another man whose name is not remembered, fitted out and started from a place known as Long Bar in search of Yankee Jim's source of gold. At that time it was common custom for a party of men who imagined they were going to good diggings to start off stealthily, frequently traveling by night to evade pursuit. About midnight a brisk rainstorm came on and found the slumbering men, some of whom got up for the purpose of replenishing the fire with wood. While doing this, one of them discerned the glimmer of a light moving through the forest in the direction of their objective. Monsieur Currier and another were detailed to investigate the light. They did so until it disappeared. On the 7th day, Currier's party spotted a miners' camp. The miners rose and hailed the strangers. One of the men proved to be Mr. Tuttle from Connecticut, who was wearing a silk smoking cap, and the other a Mr. Van Zant of Oregon. Tuttle and Van Zant told a tale of a disheveled miner upstream. He wore only a shirt. Tuttle and Van Zant renamed the canyon Shirttail, to which the canyon's name still bears that name. Not a great while after the circumstance occurred, Mr. Currier started out alone from camp to explore the country. Traveling 2 miles, he entered a little flat of comparatively smooth ground and was astonished to see the legs and feet of a man, encased in breeches and boots, projecting from a temporary shelter made of standing large slabs of pine bark endwise against a tree. Yankee Jim's sole weapon beside a knife was an old-fashioned government Jaeger, bullets for which he was anxious to get, as he had a few and no lead to make more. Mr. Currier, among his effects back at camp, had several pounds and told Yankee Jim he would return to camp and bring back both lead and black powder. Upon Currier's return, Yankee Jim admitted he was whom they call Yankee Jim, and said he was a native of the state of Maine. He even revealed his town of his birth. Back in town, the common belief was Yankee Jim was an English convict, and in fact a Sydney duck. After speaking with Yankee Jim, Mr. Currier is of the firm opinion, from his own knowledge of the New England states, Yankee Jim was who he said he was, a Yankee. Yankee Jim told Currier that he ran away from some ship and had combed the beaches of California. From Currier's conversation with Yankee Jim, Currier firmly believed that Yankee Jim was a bad character and a criminal, there was no doubt. Currier left Yankee Jim and returned to camp. Back in camp, Tuttle and Van Zant told a story that had occurred a couple of months preceding this time. They had found the skeleton of a man and a horse, supposed to have been both shot not far from this campsite. The report of the murdered miner filtered back down the mountain. Did Yankee Jim commit this murder? We will never know. As winter set in, miners began moving down the mountains. In the spring, they would return. The word of rich diggings spread quickly. As a result, the population of Yankee Jims exploded. January 1852, Yankee Jim saw that there was more profit to be made in rustling horses. The work was even easier. Robinson had no knowledge that his corrals were built over veins of gold. There is no record that Robinson ever took out any mining claims. His thievery discovered, Robinson made a hasty exit of his namesake town of Yankee Jims. He headed south toward San Diego. Soon after Robinson left Yankee Jims, a fire consumed the town, destroying any possible records of who James Robinson really was. In the book San Quentin, The Evolution of a State Prison, on page 135, marked February 27, 1852, the book noted that Yankee Jim, alias James Robinson, was booked into the prison. He had been charged with a crime in San Joaquin County and transferred to the prison ship. However, San Joaquin County had no record of his arrest. A trip to California State Archives searching the original intake records did not list James Robinson or any inmate who was 6 foot 4 inches tall. Robinson could have escaped in any direction, but he chose to head south to San Diego. From his seafaring days, Robinson probably had prior knowledge of this small Mexican town. He spoke Spanish and also knew there might be a ship willing to take him on as a hand. Somewhere on his escape south, Robinson met up with Jason Loring and William Harris. Both agreed to join Robinson as all three headed south to San Diego. The sleepy Mexican town that James Robinson might have visited in his past was no more. Prior to Robinson's entry into San Diego, there were 4 other individuals who were also escaping their past. Each in their own way, these 4 individuals would help determine James Robinson's fate. The tale begins in 1840 in southern Hungary, near the Serbian border. Born into nobility, but far from rich, Augustin Haragasti was frustrated by the calcified rules of his native land. He had heard that in America your imagination was your only limit. Joined by his cousin, Augustin left on a 2-year odyssey to find the perfect location to begin a new life for himself and his family. His 2-year quest ended in the Wisconsin Territory. He found a partner who agreed to help develop and create a new city out on the Wisconsin plains. Today, the town is known as Sauk City. At first, all went well as his town grew. Suddenly, Augustin realized he was over-leveraged and his creditors were at his heels. He needed a miracle. A lifeline suddenly did appear with the electrifying word gold was discovered in California. He and his family joined a newly formed wagon train which would follow a southern route through Santa Fe to Southern California. To anyone who would listen, his goal was to plant a vineyard in San Diego. Augustin was chosen to lead the 5 big wagons and 15 teams of oxen. In December of 1850, the Harazafi family reached their goal, San Diego, California. Shortly after their arrival, San Diego's citizens held elections for city offices. Now Colonel Harazafi handily beat his local opponent for the office of sheriff. His father Charles was elected to the city council. Joshua Bean fought with Zachary Taylor in the Mexican-American War. After the war, at age 32, he migrated to San Diego, where he became a saloon owner. With the 1850 election, he was elected San Diego's first mayor. Josh's brother Roy had also fought in the war. In Mexico, Roy had murdered a Mexican national. Wanted by the Mexican police, Roy, age 24, followed his brother to San Diego. James W. Robinson is not to be confused with Yankee Jim. In his 20s, he abandoned his wife and 3 children and escaped to Arkansas. In Arkansas, he found a new love, and together they moved out of the United States to Texas. At this time, Texas was in rebellion, seeking independence from Mexico. In Texas, Robinson became the provisional lieutenant governor and briefly held the office of provisional governor. He also served as judge. After the Mexican-American War, he and his new family headed to San Diego. With his law degree background, he became San Diego's Attorney General. Robinson and Sheriff Haragase would become fast friends and business partners, investing in San Diego property. The first priority for the city council was now to build a jail. Bids were accepted. Sheriff Haragase submitted a bid of $5,000, although the bid was $2,000 over the lowest bid. With the sheriff's father and the city council's mayor, Josh Bean, helping, the contract was given to Haragase. The final cost would grow to $7,000. In today's dollars, the jail would have cost the city $232,000. The mayor's brother, Roy Bean, would be one of the first occupants of the jail. The problem began when Roy Bean and a Scotsman argued over a woman. A duel which would take place on horseback was called for. Josh won the duel by wounding his opponent. As a result, Josh found himself an occupant of the new jail. According to one account, a young lady who fancied Roy supplied him with a tamale with a knife hidden inside. Roy dug himself out and escaped San Diego. The jail was utterly worthless. Roy escaped to Los Angeles. He would again argue over a woman and would murder the woman's husband. Bean escaped again, heading back to Texas where he would gain fame as a Texas judge. Mayor Josh Bean would also leave San Diego. Besides the jail fiasco, the mayor was caught selling City Hall to himself. He opened a bar in San Gabriel. Arguing over a woman, he would be assassinated. Census for San Diego County, 1850. Population of whites, 248. Population of tame Indians or neophytes, 483. Wild Indians or Gentiles, 1,550. The summer of 1851. Chief Antonio Gara of the local Cupino tribe sent his son into Old Town to pay his county taxes. Chief Gara, however, could only make a partial payment. Sheriff Haragase, on the advice of the Attorney General Robinson, turned down the partial payment. The tribe had to pay in full or all the tribe's livestock would be confiscated. Insulted, Chief Gara sent runners to other local tribes throughout Southern California. The invaders of their lands had to be driven out. The tribal uprising, however, failed. Chief Gara was captured and faced a quick trial and was promptly executed by firing squad. Thomas Whaley was a member of the firing squad. He was a former New York businessman and will play an important role at the conclusion of our tale. In William Smythe's 1907 History of San Diego, he tells what happened next. A curious aftermath of the Gara uprising in 1851 was the belated arrival of a party of rough characters from San Francisco in the role of volunteers for the protection of the country against the Indians. At the beginning of the outbreak, the governor had been asked for assistance and had enlisted a large company to go to San Diego in response to this appeal. Just as they were about to sail, the governor was notified that the trouble was over, but about 50 of the volunteers refused to be deprived of their adventure. They arrived in San Diego in December and went into camp in Mission Valley. A variety of trouble ensued until the San Diegans began to fear that their deliverers from San Francisco constituted a worse menace to the public peace than the Indians themselves. Horses were forcibly taken from the settlers and rows occurred. January 1st, 1852, Augustin Haragase was elected San Diego's first assembly member and leaves San Diego for California's then capital, Vallejo. As Yankee Jim and his two friends entered San Diego, the town was bankrupt. San Diego had begun issuing IOUs backed by city land as security. A visitor to San Diego wrote home his observation of the city. He found that trash, dead animals, garbage, and human waste polluted the streets. No funds for hiring police as crime increased. San Diego was a flea-infested cesspool and the most god-forsaken rat hole on earth. As James Robinson and his new companions entered San Diego, they were warned by the new sheriff that they would not be molested as long as the trio did not cause any trouble. A respected citizen of San Diego informed the sheriff that James Robinson was the notorious Yankee Jim, an undesirable who has caused trouble in the mining fields and may have even murdered. Did the respected citizen confuse James Knowlton with James Robinson? We will never know. Hearsay used in court would have a tragic consequence. The sheriff alerted the citizens to be on the watch for any mischief Robinson might cause. Trouble did come in an unlikely location. The trio were spotted stealing a rowboat. Having been spotted, Robinson, Harris, and Loring quickly made it back to shore where they abandoned the rowboat. Yankee Jim made a powerful resistance to the arrest and was finally captured by the aid of a lasso which in the hands of a person expert in its use is irresistible. A second report added, a shovel strike against the back of his head ended the struggle. The Attorney General, James W. Robinson, who also would be the prosecuting attorney, added the value of the rowboat to the value of the schooner, making the charge against the trio grand larceny. To obtain their confession, there are no documents to indicate what actually occurred during their interrogation. According to the Herald newspaper, Robinson, Loring, and Harris confessed that they had been rustling horses in Stockton and had planned to pirate the schooner for their escape. In Old Town, they had sold their horses and bought provisions, then attempted to steal the Plutus to make their way to Lower California. In a separate trial, Loring and Harris were found guilty and remanded to the California State Prison in San Francisco. Yankee Jim thought the trial was a big joke. In court, he would defend himself and even allowed the owners of the rowboat to serve on the jury. The jury must have considered that their city was not only bankrupt, but that there was a total collapse of civil order in their streets. The future of San Diego depended upon sending a clear message that law and order must be restored. They had captured the infamous Yankee Jim, and he must pay for his crime. At about 2 o'clock, the jury retired to deliberate. Some 30 minutes later, the jury returned. The foreman submitted the verdict. Guilty as charged. Overnight, James Robinson was kept in an adobe under heavy guard. The hanging would draw a large audience. Robinson was attended to by 2 priests. He would convert to Catholicism, changing his name to Santiago. The city did not have the proper material for a proper execution. The scaffold was simply 2 beams and a crossbar. The back of a wagon would do for the stage. The height of the wagon was not nearly high enough to snap his neck. The rope was cut to the wrong length, as Robinson was 6'4". To the end, Robinson still felt this was a joke to teach him a lesson. He tried to address the attendees, but as the sheriff looked down at his watch, the appointed time had come. He nodded to the driver of the cart to apply the whip to the mule. As the cart moved away, Robinson tried to tiptoe the last steps. It is said that Yankee Jim strangled for 45 minutes before death released him of his torture. The casket was fit for a man of normal height. Robinson was 6'4". This casket would have to do. Watching the spectacle of James Robinson's horrific death was Thomas Whaley. As a businessman, Whaley saw that there was a profit to be made. Who would buy this plot of land? So he did, and built what would be his family home. We pick up the tale of Yankee Jim Robinson in the wet winter of 1882. Thomas Whaley and his wife Anna had moved their entire family into the brick building over the very spot James Robinson had perished. Old Town San Diego, Thursday, January 5th, 1882. A joint wedding was to be celebrated. A joint marriage was to be held. Violet Eloise Whaley was just 19. In their joint wedding, Violet would marry George T. Bertolacci. Her sister, Anna Amelia, age 23, would wed her first cousin, John T. Whaley. What followed the ceremony would become a family tragedy. Violet's new husband was a con man. August 19th, 1885, at 6 o'clock in the morning, Violet secures her father's pistol and quietly leaves the family home for the house's privy.
Everyone blames me. It was not my fault. On our honeymoon, as we traveled east, George abandoned me. He left me just 2 weeks after our wedding. He only wanted my dowry. All my friends blamed me for the divorce. I'm ostracized. No one speaks to me. I'm tired of life, tired of living. I'm a burden. 3 weeks ago, I failed taking my life by drowning in the cistern. I guess it is fitting to end my life in our privy. Using father's gun, I leave nothing but this poem. Mad from life's history, swift to death's mystery, glad to be hurled anywhere out of this world.
Now I'm sure you're asking, what does Violet's suicide have to do with Yankee Jim? James Robinson had died over 30 years before Violet's tragic suicide. Let me explain. The Whaley house still exists. Thomas Whaley remarked that within his home he had heard heavy boots walking across the second floor. Upon inspection, he could find no one. At other times, Violet's rustling dress could be heard. Early in the 20th century, the citizens of San Diego knew the home was haunted. If you visit the Whaley house in Old Town and you feel Yankee Jim's presence, there are questions yet to be answered. Was he in reality a Sydney Duck, or was he the child of a prison inmate in Australia? How did he reach Oregon? Was he employed by the Hudson Bay Company? The Hudson Bay Company had a major trading post in Vancouver, Canada. Their ships also visited Hawaii, San Francisco, and Arcata. Or was he a crew member on a Yankee whaling ship? Or was he on a Yankee ship purchasing hides, visiting the then port of San Diego? Maybe, just maybe, Yankee Jim will confide in you and tell you his true story, the story of Yankee Jim. For more information on how you can join the effort in preserving our watershed, please contact us at www.drycreekconservancy.org. For a complete list of videos on the roaming series, visit www.youtube.com/user/MichaelStark1. We can't end this tale without mentioning what happened to San Diego's Attorney General. Remember, James W. Robinson had changed a misdemeanor theft into a felony, as well as using hearsay testimony in Yankee Jim's trial. Robinson died 5 years after the strangulation death of Yankee Jim. His death came a few years after he was committed to an insane asylum. Robinson never mentioned his family back in Ohio. For years, Robinson had pled poverty, asking his brother, still living in Ohio, for financial support. He never revealed the extensive real estate he owned in San Diego. It wasn't until 1890 when his surviving daughter, Albina, from his first marriage, learned the truth about her father. Even at this late date, not all the parcels of land had been liquidated. Albina contested the will and won in court. With more than 160 individuals and corporations involved, litigation of his will would continue through 1913.